following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hi, welcome to The Ring and All Other Sports. My name is Leo Connors. I'm your host, and today, I got a special guest, former pro wrestler and new author, Knuckles Nelson.
Nice to be here today, Leo. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Really, there's so much to cover. I told you off air. I'm just going to get right into it. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Rhode Island.
Okay. Providence?
Born and raised in a town called Scituate, Rhode Island.
Okay.
Very rural, out in the country.
Yeah. All right. How old were you when you first saw pro wrestling?
Well, my first memories of wrestling probably were around 5 or 6 years old and watching WWF.
Right.
But what really got me was in my teens when World Class Wrestling showed up on Channel 25 in Boston, and it was so different than everything that was going on, the Von Erichs and the Freebirds and everyone that was associated with that promotion.
Right.
That really hooked me.
Yeah. And that to me, that's still one of the greatest promotions of all time.
Agreed.
Today. Who were some of your favorites right away when you first started watching wrestling?
Well, my favorite wrestler as a kid was Handsome Jimmy Valiant.
Yeah.
I also was a big fan of Adrian Adonis when he
Nice.
was early on in his career. He was so ahead of his time.
Right.
The Midnight Express,
Yeah.
Ric Flair, Bruno Sammartino, and I could go on and on.
Right. I think me and you are pretty much at the same level of what we started watching wrestling and what we liked. All right. So when did you go to your first wrestling show?
My first wrestling show was at Jack Witchy Sports Arena in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, and I would beg my father to take me there. And my parents really weren't wrestling fans at all, but I would ask him relentlessly until he finally gave in and he took me up to Jack Witchy Sports Arena, and it was very different than what you see on television today.
Right. Now that's at North Attleboro?
Yeah, it's no longer there.
Right.
It's a parking lot now, but
Okay.
where the Emerald Square Mall is. But it was, legendary place
Right.
that before the Providence Civic Center was even built, wrestling would be at Jack Witchy's.
Nice. I grew up in Lowell, like I was telling you off air, and the Lowell Auditorium was the place that I went to see wrestling all the time. All right. Now, you never went to an indie show, you had told me off air.
Yeah,
No?
I really, before social media and the
Right.
internet, and I really wasn't aware of anything except wrestling magazines, and they really
Right.
didn't cover the independents back in the late 70s when I first became aware of professional wrestling on TV.
Right. They probably didn't start really covering them until like 2000, around that
Right.
era. All right. Tell us about your, I'm sorry, who trained you?
Well, I was originally trained by a man by the name of Brutal Bob Evans.
Yep, I know Bob.
And I want to give a big shout out to Bob right now because I respect and love you so much, Bob, and he helped me so much during the early stages of my career.
That's awesome. Yeah, Bob's a great guy. He trains a lot of people.
I don't think there's anyone in New England that can really say that they weren't touched in one way or another by Bob Evans. And he's like you said, he's trained so many people and has he really had a major impact on my life.
Nice. All right. Who else was in your class?
Well, when I first started out, I remember there being my friend that came with me from Rhode Island. His name was Clint Rampage, who was just a friend of mine from karate school that I attended, and we decided to give pro wrestling a shot. But I was quickly introduced to Nightmare Nick Steele,
Yes.
who is still wrestling today. The head trainer at the place was called Coastal Pro Wrestling. It was Coastal Pro Wrestling's training facility in Freetown, Massachusetts. And Brian Brieger was a name that a lot of people knew back then. He was involved in Yankee Pro Wrestling, and he also, like Bob, trained a lot of people. And I think to this day is still training people somewhere out there around the country.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And also in the class, Rip Morrison,
Nice.
Johnny Royal, Sky King, Mo Payne. There was quite a few experienced wrestlers that were around in that day. And I was very fortunate to have been around those guys and to have been in a safe environment to train.
Right. Nice. I actually met Rip when I first moved to Nashville. One of the nicest guys I've ever met.
Yeah, really nice guy.
All right. Did you get to work? Tell us about your first match, and then I have a follow-up on that.
Well, my first professional match was against Mo Payne, who was a 400-pound guy who was as agile as could be. He was an excellent, he had speed, strength, And we trained together a lot in school, in the wrestling school. So by the time we got to our first match was appropriately enough in a small VFW hall in Seekonk, Massachusetts. We were ready for it, and he had half the town of Taunton, Massachusetts there that night. And I was real easy to hate. So we went back and forth for about 10 minutes, and I actually came out on top with a little help from a manager they had put with me that night, whose name eludes me at the moment, and I got the win.
Nice. I told you when I came in, I actually watched a few minutes of it. He was a big dude.
He was
huge.
He was.
All right. When you first started, did you get to work for all different promoters?
Well, the thing about Coastal Pro Wrestling
Yeah.
that I liked about them right away was they encouraged me to work for other promotions. They let me go out, and I worked for Yankee Pro Wrestling, and I worked for New England Pro Wrestling, Big City Mike, and Richard Byrne, and then eventually I made my way to the Century Wrestling Alliance and the Boston Bad Boy Tony Rumble.
Nice. Okay. Now you no longer wrestle, so you're a former wrestler.
Yes,
Okay. And like I said earlier, you've written a book.
I have.
Now, can you tell us about your book and when it's coming out?
Sure. The book should be out on Amazon and iTunes in 2020. And it's basically my memoirs. And it goes back to when last year at this time, I was going through a very difficult time. I had my mother died a really tragic, unexpected death. I went through a really tough divorce. I was working in a job that I really hated, and I decided to get on my Harley Davidson and drive into the mountains of Virginia and look up my childhood hero, Handsome Jimmy, the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. Nice. And so much came out of that trip. I went down there. We were strangers,
Right.
and we're very close friends now. And he gave me a lot of really good advice and helped me to get things back on track, and his philosophy on life, and meeting his wife Angel and everyone associated with the BWC, which is Boogie's Wrestling Camp in
Right.
Shawsville, Virginia, which I highly recommend to anyone to visit this facility. It's a Wrestling Hall of Fame museum. There is so much wrestling history in this place. It's about an 8-hour drive from New England, but it's well worth it to go down there.
Right. Now, what Chelsea like? Is it Sundays that he has it's like an open house or whatever? Is it on every Sunday?
Practice is from noon to 4 on Sundays.
Yep.
It's open to the public. Admission is free. It's on Allegheny Spring Roads in Shawsville, Virginia.
Nice. I'm a huge, like I told you earlier too, I'm a huge Jimmy Valiant fan, and that's when I met you at the past Hall of Fame and the Fan Fest.
Yes.
And I had met Jimmy the year before, but the first time I went to the Fan Fest, and I must have talked to him for about an hour. He probably was sick of me, but I don't think he really was, because he really enjoys talking with the fans.
I'll tell you something I noticed about him. He does care. He wants to talk to, he wants to learn about the people that he's meeting. He's not about himself at all.
Right.
He had a illustrious career,
He sure did.
but he doesn't flaunt it. Like he's content to go into a restaurant and sit in the back corner and not be noticed.
Right.
When he goes to these Fan Fest things, I notice the wrestlers, his peers, and the fans alike are all, I'm going to say, extra happy to see him.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to have like a little warm spot for this guy because he's just so genuine and so easy to like.
Yeah. And like I said, I was a huge fan of Jimmy Valiant. And then, like you said, the long career that he had, there's the Boogie Woogie Man. Charlie Brown from out of town. He just did so much in the wrestling business. And it's great to see him still affiliated with the business. A lot of guys, they stop wrestling and they fade away to nothing.
Boogie is still wrestling. He still gets into the ring. He is about to embark on his 5th decade in the wrestling business. And when he gets in the ring, he doesn't do a whole lot anymore, but he puts the boots on and he gets in there, and he still participates in professional wrestling matches.
Right. And he's got so much charisma, so there's no doubt in my mind that the fans must go crazy for him still. Honestly.
Every weekend he's somewhere around the country.
Right.
At a Fan Fest or a Comic-Con or autograph session. And this Sunday, I will be in Shawsville with Jeff Katz, and we're going down there. An annual event we have now is we go and see Boogie on his birthday.
Oh, wow,
and spend the
that's
day with
cool.
him on his birthday.
Now, seeing you brought him up, Jeff Katz, that's somebody that you worked with when you had your own promotion, Wrestling Star Wars, correct?
Yes, Jeff. I actually met Jeff through Tony Rumble.
Okay.
And I think it's safe to say, I think he would be okay with me saying Jeff's my best friend. And I'm very close to him and his entire family, his wife Heidi and his 3 kids. And Jeff is on the air in WRVA in Richmond on weekdays from 3 to 6. And he's top rated down there, his radio show, just like everywhere he goes. And I had a lot of experience working with him for Tony Rumble's Century Wrestling Alliance
Right.
promotion. And then he briefly worked with me with Wrestling Star Wars, but he ended up getting a new radio gig and moved out to Las Vegas.
I was going to mention that because that's what I thought. He moved to Vegas when that's when he stopped with you. Now,
Yeah.
another guy that worked with you with Wrestling Star Wars was a very, very nice guy, a friend of this show, Big Woody, who passed away not too long ago. How did you end up getting hooked up with Woody?
Big Woody, the human tripod. Also, one of the best friends I've ever had in my life.
Right.
I met Woody when I was wrestling back in the 90s. It wasn't a full-time gig for me. I always had to have something else I was doing.
Right.
And I worked for a seafood company in Seabrook, New Hampshire when I was living up on the seacoast. And he ended up coming to work there as well. And I remember one day the door to the building got kicked open and he walked in and he said, "Hey, Knuckles, what's up?" And he knew who I was, which was really good for my ego.
Right.
And we became instant friends
Yeah.
because he was very likable, very easy to guy. I miss him every day. I mean, even like, when social media, you're never really not around people that you're friends with. You can talk to
Right.
them every day, even if they're on the other side of the world.
Right.
And I talk to him every day, and now I can't do that anymore. So I miss him. I miss him very much.
Yeah, I actually have a good friend of mine that passed away July 3rd, 2 years ago, and I talked to him every day. You know what I mean? And we were big. He loved wrestling, but he was more of a hockey fan, which is my number one sport besides pro wrestling. And so I know exactly what you're feeling, how you can't talk to him anymore. And it's hard. It's very hard. But knowing how much everyone loved him, you know what I mean? It must have been nice. Like, did you end up going to the thing they had after he had passed?
Oh, his celebration of life?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't have missed it.
Right.
Yes, I went to that. It was a very sad and happy occasion at the same time.
Right.
Because Woody wouldn't have wanted everyone to be sad. He would have wanted us all to eat and have a good time and
Right.
tell a few stories. And then he had us sing "My Way" by Frank Sinatra at the end, where I know he was looking down, going, "Look, I got them all singing. I got them all singing." And he was there in the room that day.
Nice.
And everyone from wrestling to his childhood friends to his family to his extended family, we were all there, and it was a wonderful day.
That's awesome. That really is. Because like I said, he was such a great guy. I mean, he's friends with, Todd Sopel. Have you heard of Todd?
I do.
Well, I don't get along too well with Todd. And Woody still, even though they were such good friends, he still helped me out with my show. He told me, not too happy with you about, when you're fighting with Todd and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But he was just a great guy. Once he liked you, he had no problem telling you if you were wrong, if he thought you were wrong. And I probably was wrong in my little heat I had with this guy. You know what I mean? But Woody was just a great guy. And he's very well missed. So sorry for your loss. Believe me, I definitely don't understand. Now, I want to get back to the Wrestling Star Wars again because you had a public access show. Was it called Wrestling Star Wars?
The show was called This Week in Wrestling.
Okay.
And the way it started out was I had the idea, like a lot of people, when my time in the ring was over, I decided to buy a ring, open a school, and I found a space right on Salisbury Beach, the Beach Club Pavilion, where I was able to paint the entire place black, hang lights over the ring, and turn it into a TV studio. And it could hold about 1,000 people. So we could open up the doors on Friday nights. And so I opened up the promotion Wrestling Star Wars and a tribute to World Class Wrestling. And I called the school the Combat Zone in a tribute to Tony Rumble. And Woody was very instrumental in that, helping me find the location, introducing me to local businesses that supported the promotion.
Right.
And the TV show, I was very fortunate that there was a guy that lived in Haverhill that was a very well-known announcer by the name of Brian Webster. And I was able to contact Brian, told him what I was doing, and asked him if he was interested in coming in. And he came in, and he stayed from beginning to end with us. And
Wow.
and it was he just brought a lot of credibility to the show.
Right.
My dream would have been to have had Brian Webster and Jeff Katz together calling the matches,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't meant to be because Jeff wasn't in New England at the time.
Right. All right. I want to talk about when you first started working for Tony Rumble. Now, you had worked for who were you working with before you met Tony?
Well, I mentioned a few a little
Yankee
bit
Pro,
earlier.
you said, right?
Yankee Pro, New England Pro Wrestling, the USWF with Richard Byrne.
Yeah.
I worked for Killer Kowalski, Coastal Pro Wrestling. Bob Evans had a promotion called Renegade Wrestling, which morphed into EPW.
Yep.
And so, I was making the rounds around the New England circuit.
So where exactly did you meet the Boston Bad Boy?
Well, I knew who Tony Rumble was, obviously,
Right.
from the ICW,
Yeah.
and I was a wrestling fan before I ever became a wrestler, so I was a fan of Tony Rumble's, and I just caught wind that he was running a show in Hanover, Massachusetts at the high school, and it was in the middle of the afternoon in the dead of winter, and I didn't tell any of my normal, back then I was like around PJ Walker, Nick Barbary, Scott Taylor, Rick Fuller, and I didn't say anything to anybody. I just got in the car by myself and I drove up to this show and I found Tony. I walked into the locker room and the first person I encountered was Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I walked a little further. Here's King Kong Bundy and Atlas and Tito and all very well famous wrestlers.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so I definitely want to be here. And Tony walked in and he put me under a mask that night and they called me the New Hampshire Nightmare. And I wrestled Tony. And he had a very short match. His matches were very short,
Right.
and ended with the Boston Crab as his submission hold. And after that, I was on every one of his shows until the day he died.
Wow, and he bloodied your mouth that night too.
He did,
didn't he?
Yeah,
I
he
read
caught
that.
me with a clothesline right in the mouth, and when I took the mask off, Tony Atlas walked up to me and he said, "That's good for the business, kid."
Nice. All right, so Tony must have opened up a lot of doors for you, I would imagine, considering where you've went afterwards. Like, did he help you get to Japan?
Anything I ever did in the world of pro wrestling
Right.
was because of Tony Rumble. He got me booked in Japan. He got me booked in WWE. He got me booked in WCW,
Right.
the USWA in Memphis. All these promotions, everywhere I went, was because Tony either made a phone call
Right.
or on his shows, you could walk into the locker room and Kevin Sullivan and Jim Cornette could both be there
Right.
scouting talent,
Yeah.
which is something I can't say this for sure, but I don't think that was happening on any other independent shows around
Yeah,
the country.
probably. I don't think
It could have been,
Right,
but
right.
I'm not aware of it. And I would be remiss if I didn't come to New Hampshire and mention he also put me in a series of matches with a guy by the name of Super Bad Steve Bradley. And I became a better wrestler wrestling Steve Bradley. I think when I watch kids on TV now, I couldn't keep up with what they're doing now. I just wouldn't have been good enough to do it. He could today. Steve Bradley
Right.
was ahead of his time, and I used to just try to keep up with him. And the other person that was the most notable favorite opponent of mine on Tony Rumble shows was Vic Steamboat, the younger brother of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Steamboat was so smooth in the ring,
Right.
and we worked a series of matches over a period of years, and he really helped me a lot too, and he was very influential in me becoming a better worker.
Nice. I want to bring up a guy real quick. I think he refereed some of your matches. Referee Richard Lannon.
Yes.
Actually, my older kid's mom, my ex, that's his first cousin. It's
Nice.
Rich. I've known Rich forever.
Yeah, he was an excellent referee.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, back then, was there anybody better than him as a ref, honestly, back then?
I don't know if I would compare who was better than who,
Right.
but Scott Dickinson was a top official.
Oh, that's true,
Billy
yeah.
Silverman was a top official. And some people from back in that era might laugh at this, but I thought Whiskey Jack Savage was a great referee.
Okay, nice. All right, so when you first went over to Japan the first time, did you go over, you went over alone?
No, we went over with the NWA World Tag Team titles. It was myself and Eric Sprazier,
Okay.
and we met. I used to run into Shun Yamaguchi. He would be, at the time, a photographer for the Gong magazine, and he was always really super friendly to me. And one day he called me up and he said, "It's getting busy over in Japan. Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Of course I do." He said, "Well, Tony gave me a number, Rumble, and next thing you know, me and Eric were on a plane over to Japan, and the tour itself was for a promotion called World Pro Wrestling, and they would bring people from Boston, Minnesota,
Right.
Florida, all other countries too, England, Australia, Japan, Korea, and we would all be on the same tour bus going around on a 10 or 20-day tour of Japan, depending on what it was, because I went over there several times.
Nice.
And I mean, we got off the plane the first time, and they put us in a cab, and they took us right to the building, literally to the building, and we were like, it's like a 20-hour plane ride. It's like you're
Right.
totally trashed when you get there, like just so tired and exhausted. And we were like, next thing you know, we're in the ring with Japanese wrestlers that don't speak English, and it was like, welcome to the next level of wrestling.
Right, were they hitting you hard?
They hit hard, but we hit hard too.
There you go. Right, right. You have to, right? That's what
Yeah.
I mean. Everything I've ever heard about, from American wrestlers going over there, if you don't hit them back hard, they're going to really hit you even worse. I mean,
Yeah, and another thing that I noticed when you start laying in the shots is they suddenly speak English.
oh, yeah. Right. Now, how long did you team with Eric?
Eric and I didn't team that long.
Right.
I would say it was less than a year, but we had a measure of success, and we
Right.
won the tag titles in a four-way match at the NWA's 50th anniversary. But I always, and this is nothing against other people that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
teamed with, I always wish we could have had a longer run
Right.
to see what we might have been able to do with it.
Yeah, because I think you guys were a great tag team.
Thank you.
Definitely. Now you teamed with Duke Dalton also,
I did.
and now you teamed with him longer, right?
I would say Dukes and I were together longer. He was a very different wrestler than Eric, and I had a different chemistry with him.
Right.
He was Eric and I were more lower to the ground, and for a big guy, he did a lot of aerial stuff. He did a lot of moves off the ropes, and
Right.
he was he was a very talented wrestler.
Right. Nice. And you also teamed with Big Rick Fuller.
Yeah, Rick Fuller and I won the NWA tag titles in a night where we lost the titles one night in I can't remember the town, to the Public Enemy,
Right.
Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge, and then 2 nights later we won them back. And I think I lost them with Duke Dalton, and then I won them with Fuller, or that could be reversed. And
Right.
so we didn't really have a history of teaming together, but we did win the tag team titles that given occasion.
I think it might have been Bolton, Mass, that you lost to the
It
Public
could be.
Enemy. I
It
think
could
that's
be.
what I read just a little while ago, actually.
Yep.
All right. Now we had talked when I first came in. I told you I really wanted to bring up the USWA because I'm a huge Memphis mock. I am. I love it. What was it like when you went down there and not knowing anybody?
The only thing I had going for me down there was Tony Rumble had given me the right phone numbers
Yeah.
to call. And when I got down there, I was told everything is booked like a month in advance. It was just like I just jumped in my car and drove to Tennessee.
Right. It's
And
crazy.
because I felt like no one's going to see me here.
Yeah.
And there was an expression back then: if you ain't been to Memphis, you ain't done nothing.
Right.
So I went to Memphis.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough I went right to the TV studio and I met Randy Hales. And next thing you know, they put me in a match with a team called PG-13. And then there were a couple of shows after that around the area. But like he had told me, he said, this is all booked in advance. He said, if you want to keep following us around, you can. He said, but it would be better to try and get booked down
Right.
the road.
Right.
But I can say I did wrestle in Memphis.
That's pretty cool. And Randy Hales was great to you?
Everyone was really nice to me down
Nice.
there. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Now, when you wrestled who did you wrestle for first when you did Enhancement Talent? Was it WCW or WWF?
Well, my first match in the WWF was against Razor Ramon in 1993 in New York. It was the night after he won the Intercontinental title.
Right.
And I was green. I was as green as this wall. And I had no business being in the ring, in a WWF ring at that point. I wasn't experienced enough, but I had to find that out the hard way. And then it was about 7 more years before I was back from the independents to the WWF or the WCW, which is what it was back then.
Right.
It's a very big jump.
Yeah.
It's I didn't realize how big of a jump it was going to be. But you're suddenly around the top elite wrestlers in the world. And I had very high hopes of doing something in the WWF or the WCW, but they had no plans for me at all because it was just my competition were people like Mr. Perfect,
Yeah,
Razor Ramon, The Undertaker,
Right.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock. All these people were the top wrestlers in the world. But I look back and there was a period of time where I didn't feel good about the whole experience, but I look back and embrace it now because I was lucky. I was lucky. A lot of people never get the chance to have one match.
Right.
And I wrestled in the WWF for 2 years when they would come to the Northeast. And I also wrestled on Monday Nitro, another, thanks to Tony Rumble down there, and had some other opportunities in WCW. But we didn't talk about this off air, but back then I was dealing with a lot of drug and alcohol problems. And I was able to, I can say now that I've been sober for 15 years.
Congratulations.
And but that held me back a lot back then.
Right.
It held back the way my body looked. It held back with my being reliable and making a lot of mistakes and pissing people off. And the business that I loved and would have done anything for just didn't pan out the way I wanted to. But I look back on it now very fondly.
Nice. Now, one of your matches you had that you teamed with T. Ranchula, who was probably the very first independent wrestler that wasn't in this area that I ever read about in a magazine. What was it like teaming with T. Ranchula? He was a big guy, too.
And I knew him from other independent
You did,
NWA shows. We had not wrestled each other or teamed with each other,
Right.
but that night we wrestled Lex Luger and the Giant, who went on to become the Big Show.
Right.
And that was just a phenomenal experience. It was
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Day in Savannah, Georgia, and that was a great night.
Nice. Okay. Now, like you ran Wrestling Star Wars. I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but like I told you earlier, that you just got so much to cover. You ran Wrestling Star Wars for 4 years?
From about 99 to 03.
Okay. Do you ever have any issues with people not wanting to, like do what you asked them to do?
I think the experience with Wrestling Star Wars was pretty good because I ran a pretty tight ship, and,
Right.
and people pretty much did what I asked them to do.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay. Now, in 2014, it's like I said, I'm jumping all over the place, but you were inducted into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame by Joe Bruin. What was that experience like for you?
Well, first I would have to say that Joe Bruin is such a class act.
Yes.
He his events are top notch. I always wonder how is he going to pull this off, and then it runs as smooth as can be.
Yeah.
I didn't expect to be inducted into a Wrestling Hall of Fame ever, but I was very humbled and honored to have the opportunity to do that. And Jeff Katz inducted me, and I got to return the favor and induct him and Big Woody this past year.
Nice. And I was there for that. Now, who else? Do you remember anybody else going in the class that you went in with?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fine. I want to bring up, I noticed you just got back from Australia.
I did.
And you're wearing the shirt.
I am.
Electric Mary, your favorite band?
Well, Electric Mary is the singer from Electric Mary is a man named Rusty Brown, and he's from Melbourne, Australia, and he's a phenomenal rock and roll singer. He is the king of Aussie rock and roll, and we became friends on social media.
Right.
And I started to listen to Electric Mary around the time I was getting divorced, and I realized that this guy was like touching my soul. His music was speaking to me. I felt like all the songs were about what I was going through in my life. So I reached out to him, and I sent him a letter on their fan page on Facebook. And my ex-wife at the time told me, don't bother, don't waste your time with it. It's just a fan page. No one's going to respond to you. And he did respond to me.
Nice.
And we became very close friends. And in 2019, they released their new album, Mother is the name of the album, and there's a song called The Way You Make Me Feel, which they mention Knuckles Nelson in the song. And I just want to take a second and say hello to all my family in Australia, to Rusty, to Pete, to Brett, to Spider, to Alex, to Leanne, to Kim, to Jillian, to everyone that I met over there, to Chowie. I love you all, and I will be back to see you soon. And these people embraced me and my girlfriend Betsy, and of course I want to say hello to my girlfriend Betsy. I love you, Bets. And we had just the most incredible time over there, and I managed to write a 30-page chapter out of my trip to Australia, and I got to introduce Electric Mary on stage in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane in front of capacity crowds, and it was just a wonderful experience to be able to be standing in the crowd and to have Rusty look down and tell everyone in the crowd, there's some people here that traveled all the way from Boston, Massachusetts, USA to see us tonight. Yeah. And we had all access passes. We flew on the plane with them from Sydney to Brisbane, and got to spend time with Rusty in his hometown. And Rusty Brown is my brother from another mother.
Nice. That's awesome. And I saw all your pictures. So, I mean, and there's a lot, all the people that you mentioned, I'm sure are in all those pictures, because there was a lot of people in those pictures. Some of them, like group of 9 of yous, and then, the next picture, there'd be a whole bunch. Really, really cool. It's great that you got to know, like your favorite band. Not many people get that opportunity.
Well, the thing about my book, which is called From the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat, because I'm I practice yoga at Rhode Island Power Yoga in North Kingston, Rhode Island. It's about reaching out to the people that I really admire. Right. And how much that came out of that. And I can't say to everyone, if you do that, you'll have the same result. But I think it's worth a try, because whether it was Jimmy Valiant, whether it was my yoga teachers, whether it was Rusty and all the people from Electric Mary and the extended family of Electric Mary, I just became a better person for it. I'm just so grateful to have had the opportunity, and I was able to put it all into a book.
Nice. That's excellent. We'll probably bounce back to your career, but let's jump into some fan questions. We got about 6 or 7 questions. This isn't a question, but I'll read it to you. Ian Shea, holy blast from the past. I remember Knuckles at the late Killer Kowalski's appreciation show at Good Times Emporium in November of '97. Just a few hours after WWE had a matinee show at TD Garden. Little did I know years later on old WWE 24/7 on demand from watching primetime wrestling that Knuckles was enhancement talent in WWE. Here in '97, I was thinking he was just a young up-and-coming prospect. Funny that first time seeing Knuckles, I met a then teenager, some guy whose name escapes me, Bo Douglas. You know Bo.
I do.
All right. John Rodeo says, what influence did Pat Doyle, an often forgotten figure in New England wrestling, have on your career?
Well, everything you just read brought back a lot of memories.
Right.
The first thing I want to say is I was not trained by Killer Kowalski, but I spent a lot of time at Killer Kowalski's
Okay.
school. Walter and Richard Byrne were very, very good to me. They would let me come up there and train, even though I really wasn't one of their guys, so to speak. And you could go up there on any given night, and you could be in the ring with John Cronus, Perry Saturn, Matt Bloom, Tim McNeely, Brian Walsh, Scott Taylor, Freight Train Dan. There was China. There was all these people that ended up, with very, very big, high-profile careers, and I was really fortunate to have had the opportunity to have ever stepped foot once. You walk up those steps, everyone knows what I'm talking about, into Richard Byrne's karate school, and you get into that ring that was stiff as this. And then you mentioned Patrick J. Doyle.
Yes.
Pat, I haven't seen Pat in a long time, but I love Pat Doyle. He was the unsung hero of the Century Wrestling Alliance. There was no Century Wrestling Alliance or NWA New England without Pat. Wow. What he did behind the scenes, and he was a genius. His television work, his production work, what he expected people to do in the ring to make it come off the way it did. There was just no CWA or NWA without Pat Doyle. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give him a 15.
Wow, that's great. Jason Stewart wants to know, what were your thoughts on Jason Rumble Rage taking over NWA New England after Tony's passing? But wait a minute, didn't you run it first?
Well, that's something that at one time I would have been like out of my mind talking about, but it's been a lot of years now, and I was asked by Tony's wife to take over the NWA, and I had ideas that she didn't like and she didn't want to go along with, and next thing I know, they were telling me, well, you're out and Jason's in and he's going to be known as Tony Rumble's son. And it was, at the time, it was something that really bothered me. I almost say it offended me.
Right.
But, all these years later, it's no big deal. I think Jason's a good guy. I think anyone, I really don't have any animosity towards anyone that from wrestling nowadays. And that would all be thanks to my yoga practice.
Yes, nice. Jake Olette wants to know, from the time you broke in the business to the day you stopped wrestling, how much did the business change? And did you agree with the changes that were taking place?
Well, I remember that's an awesome question. I remember there being ESPN was doing a Between the Lines documentary on wrestling at one of Tony's shows. Right. And wrestling had already been exposed at the highest level as far as it being, the finishes being predetermined. And I hated that. And I did not want to expose the business. I did not want, even though it already was, Vince McMahon had already exposed it, so I don't know what I was protecting. But I kind of came up in an era where you protected it. And I remember being in that locker room with Jim Cornette and King Kong Bundy, and I wouldn't talk to the cameras, and I wouldn't, robbing myself of exposure at the time. I probably should have. But I hated giving it away. I hated that at one point it was given away, but you know what I've come to learn, and I'm sure everyone will agree, no one cared. Right. People that love wrestling, and that's all there is to it. So, and the other changes I would say, like, I'm a big NBA fan, NFL fan, NHL. The athletes have progressed to a point. Wrestlers did too, right? And all the change, like when I look at wrestling, on a Monday night, if I turn it on, no matter what the promotion is, I'm just so impressed with the way, the level of athleticism that I see.
Right. All right. Well, seeing that you still watch it here and there.
I do.
Okay. So, is there anybody in there right now that you like? Wow, I wish I could have wrestled him.
I don't know if I would say someone that I wanted to wrestle, but I'm very intrigued by the whole AEW.
Yep.
That's got my attention.
Yeah.
I watched the Raw reunion show,
Yep.
and I thought it was painful to watch the entire show until the end when Austin came out.
Yeah.
And how he's actually surpassed Hogan and Flair as the guy.
Yeah.
Hogan used to be that guy,
Right.
and now it's clearly Austin. In history, for history's sake. But if there's anyone in the wrestling world today that I wish I had wrestled, probably not, because I'm 56 years old and I'd probably get my ass kicked.
Right. I was hoping you'd say someone like Samoa Joe or something, somebody that's, smash mouth wrestler, because that's pretty much what you kind of were in a way, right? I mean, you could wrestle, don't get me wrong, but I mean,
I will say that I was nowhere near as good as I thought I was.
Okay.
I was very full of myself and impressed with myself back then. And when I got to the WWE, I was smacked down so fast, no pun intended. I was smacked down to reality of the low-level independent wrestlers that I used to turn my nose up to.
Right.
When I got to the WWF and the WCW, I was that person now. Right. And I was at the absolute bottom. And the only thing I was going to do, I became very good at counting the lights in the arena because I was on my back at the end of every single match.
Right. Now, did anybody in the WWE give you any pointers or, try to help you at all when you were there?
Well, I remember being at TV and working out with Ken Shamrock.
Yep.
And I remember being in the ring with him and Billy Gunn and D'Lo Brown and other people, just going over different moves. And they were looking to practice the moves on me, but they were all really cool and let me do it on them too.
Right.
So there was and Cactus Jack too. I wrestled Cactus Jack in the mid '90s, and I was so surprised that anytime I ever ran into him, he always remembered me and remembered the match and would bring it up and talk about. And when we wrestled, it wasn't in a WWF or ECW ring. It was on an independent show. Right. But he gave me a lot of feedback after the match. So I think a lot of people. I wrestled Hardcore Holly one night at a WWF TV taping. He offered a lot of feedback, and a lot of people thought he was a dick. Right. But he was really cool to me that night, so maybe I caught him on a good night.
Yeah, that's true. Adam Luce wants to know, Adam?
I do.
All right. Adam wants to know you have any great memories of Good Times Emporium in Somerville? That's where I met Adam, was at Good Times a long time ago.
What I remember about Good Times Emporium was a big, happy family.
Yeah.
I remember before Tony Rumble died, everyone from, you mentioned Jason, Sheldon Goldberg, myself, Sprazier, Shun Yamaguchi, Scott Dickinson, everyone, we were a big, happy family. And when Tony passed away, it splintered. Right. Everyone went in their own. Everyone was, and myself included. We all went off to do our own thing. And I remember Howard Brody, the president of the NWA, calling me up one night, and he said, "What the F is going on up there in New England?" He said, "You think Tony would be happy with what's going on up there?" And I remember when I hung up the phone with him, I was like, "No, he wouldn't be." But it was too late. It was too far gone. No one. Tony was the glue that held everything together. Right. And I also remember those Good Time Emporium shows being marathon TV tapings. He would tape a month because we were on WNDS at the time, and he would tape a month of TV in one day, and you would wrestle 4 or 5 times in one day. And so they were long, grueling days. For very little money.
Right. And WCW wrestled against the Power Twins, right? Am I remembering that correctly? Dean and Dave, is that?
I love those guys. They were a great team. I don't think I wrestled them in WCW, but I wrestled them a lot on Tony's shows. Okay. There was Tony had some 5-on-5 matches at times when the Brotherhood would take on a group of guys, and I'm gonna try to remember. It would be the Power Company, Steamboat, Ronnie DiMaria. Yeah. But on my team, it would be Rick Fuller, Matt Bloom, Rumble. So I was I was surrounded by some pretty some solid guys that.
Yeah. Well, Tony's company was great. I mean, back then it was Tony and Killers when they had they pretty much were the top promoters in New England at the time, correct?
Yeah, I think Yankee Pro Wrestling has very quietly outlasted everyone. But yes, at the time, yes.
Is that Joe Eugenio?
That was Joe Eugenio, yeah, which is Steve Ricard, I think is.
Yes, Steve Ricard now. Yep.
Who's someone that I've known for many years too.
Yes, I actually went to the first Top Rope show not too long ago, and I hadn't been there since they were Yankee Pro. I mean, that was a long time. All right, listen, why don't we get into some the name game a little bit? I like to bring up a few names and tell me a story or a pass, or you like them, you don't like them, whatever you want to say.
Sounds good.
Big City Mike.
Big City Mike was a guy that was a really great guy. I got along with him very well. He was not a good businessman.
Right.
When he had Champs Arena in Salisbury Beach, that could have and should have been a thriving business.
Right.
But he was too nice. He was just too, he was a very, very nice man. And he didn't, I think he could have done a whole lot different in Champs Arena. And, like a lot of people were talking about it passed away. So I would say I have very fond memories of Rick Martello.
Okay. Tony Atlas.
Tony Atlas is someone that I wrestled on Tony Rumble shows.
Right.
I probably wrestled Atlas maybe 6 or 8 times. And in the beginning, he didn't have the time of day for me. But by the end, he actually put me over in matches because that's what Tony wanted. And that was I felt like that was a sign that I had made some sort of inroads with him because he, really, who am I to have, I was no one to have beaten Tony Atlas. But Tony was always really cool to me.
Nice. One of your ex-tag team partners, Eric Sprazier, who I did try to, just so you know, I did try to get him to come on, but he said that it's in his past now. And I told him, though, if he ever does a show like this, it better be mine first, Eric. But Eric Sprazier.
Eric's someone that I see on social media more than in person.
Yeah.
We have seen each other here and there over the years. I love Eric like a brother.
Right.
I think if either one of us needed the other one, we could pick up the phone and call each other, and we would be there like that.
Right.
Back when I was wrestling, Eric was a lot more responsible than me, and I was, like I said, I was struggling with a lot of demons back then. And he had a family, he had a mortgage, and he took care of business for both of us.
Right.
When we would, fly to a show or wherever we were, he would have the rental car ready for us.
Right.
He would, when we were going back and forth to Japan, he would always say, "Come and stay at my house," because he lived in Revere at the time.
Right.
And he was someone, I don't know what I would have done without Eric. So I just want to say, Eric, I love you.
Nice. And I'll tell you, it's awesome, seriously, that you have no problem admitting, you know what I mean, that you had some issues in the past, you know what I mean, with alcohol and drugs. I admire that you're able to sit here, you know what I mean, and say that you had issues and he might have helped you more because of your situation. Because honestly and truthfully, I had a lot of demons myself growing up. So, how about Duke Stolton?
I thought Duke Stolton was someone that was going to go on to a major career in the WWE. I thought as a singles wrestler, he probably would have done that. I don't have any say over who makes it and doesn't make it, so I have no input on that. But he was a great guy, and he's another one that I haven't seen in a long time. But I consider him a friend, and I see him and his incredibly beautiful wife and family. He has an awesome family, and I'm happy as can be for him. And I love you too, Dukes.
Nice. And your last of the Brotherhood tag team partners, Big Rick Fuller.
We were just talking about the fact that, seeing Rick in the movie The Fighter was really cool, seeing him as the bouncer in the nightclub. And I know he had a lot of success in the wrestling world in WCW and in Japan. And I haven't seen him in 15 years, but nothing but respect and love for Rick Fuller.
Did you ever have to take a chop from him, or was he always on your team?
Early on in Yankee Pro Wrestling, I showed up at, there was a lot of good wrestling in New Bedford, Massachusetts back then. And I wrestled PJ Walker, Scott Taylor, and one night I showed up and they said, "You're going to be wrestling Rick Fuller." And Rick gave me more chops than I can possibly remember, and they were brutal.
Yeah,
and
that's why I asked.
And then he gave me a power bomb, and the ring didn't move when he gave me the power bomb, and it was the only time I ever was carried out on a stretcher. Yeah. And in the back, I was really scared. I didn't know what was gonna, if I was gonna even be able to get up. And I remember coming over, and this big, gigantic guy with hair down to here, looking down, saying, "You'll be all right." And he walks away, and he was right. I was all right.
Nice. All right. Did you train Billy Wolf?
The name's not familiar, Billy Wolf. I had a school, the Combat Zone, in Salisbury Beach, and He may have been there.
Okay.
I really didn't. There was really no one that came out of the school that went on to become a pro wrestler. The school had a lot of people come in
Right.
and leave shortly. Now you're mentioning the name. I'm going to take that back. And if it's who I'm thinking of, yes, I did.
Okay.
And he was. If this is a kid that ended up going down to Florida and going to Florida State University, and said he wasn't going to pursue wrestling, if it's him, yes, I did.
Okay. I do know one guy I think you trained, but I don't think he lasted with you very long. Brian Privatera.
I don't know. I don't think I know.
Okay.
That's another name that
Okay.
doesn't ring a bell.
How about a great tag team that I know you took on? The Archangels. Damon Darkangelo and Felix King, Steve King.
Yeah, Steve is someone that I'm still friends with on Facebook to this day.
Right.
And him and his wife Teresa, I love them both. They're great people. And we wrestled them one time,
That's it?
and there was like. It was one of those matches where after the match we were all like, "Wow, that went really, really well."
Right.
So I'll never know what it would have been like to have done a program with them and wrestled
Yeah.
them like every night.
Right.
That would have been great
Because
because
they were a good team.
they were an outstanding
Yeah.
team. They're an outstanding team. And when you look at tag team wrestling today, they were already getting into the whole multiple moves, not just like one move,
Right,
one move,
right.
one move. They were doing boom, 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 boom. In that one match, I remember them just like kicking me around, and I was like way bigger than them, but they were still,
Right,
they were hard to keep up with too.
Nice. How about Slick Wagner Brown?
One of my personal favorites.
Yeah.
Slick Wagner Brown, I remember when he first started out, I remember when he was in school, when he first started having matches up at Kowalski's.
Right.
And there was a guy named Tom Jeanette that used to do fairs around New England.
Okay.
He had this whole fair circuit. And I remember getting him booked on shows, and we went together to a couple of shows, and Tom Jeanette said, he said, "What am I going to do with this guy?" I said, "Well, put him with me." And he said,
Right.
"Well," he said, "if he's the babyface, you're going to have to let him pin you." And I was like, "Well, of course I'll let him pin me." Like,
Right.
that's how much I thought of him. And,
Yeah.
and we had good matches. And he's another one that I'm surprised didn't go on to a major career in wrestling.
too.
And maybe I shouldn't say that. He has had a major career in wrestling, but I
yeah.
think there's a major career in the WWE, and then there's a major career on the independents.
Right.
And he has had a very successful career. But one of my favorites.
I was a little disappointed when he was with Ring of Honor that they were just kind of not doing what they should have done with him. The kid is very talented, and they had him losing all the time. I just didn't understand it.
Well, while we're on the subject of,
Yeah.
of people like from that era,
Yeah.
some of my favorite wrestlers from back then would be Fred the Rocket Curry,
Yes.
Dylan Cage.
Yeah.
Those two guys in particular, Ron Zombie.
Yeah.
Ron Zombie is somebody that outlasted everybody,
Right.
and he has been. And when I still will see a match of his, say on YouTube,
Yeah.
what he's still doing to his body, it's amazing to me that he's still in the ring and performing at the level that he does. But
Right.
those particular guys that I just mentioned, they're all very close friends too. They're in a very, I'm going to say, tight knit circle.
Yeah.
But those were my favorite. Those are like my personal favorite wrestlers.
Nice. And I just want to say real quick to Dylan Cage, I've been thinking of you, man. Thoughts and prayers, buddy. How about, I know you took on in a tag team match. It was a four-way where you won the championship. One of the teams was Tully Blanchard and Tom Pritchard.
Yes.
What was it like working with those guys?
Well, Tully Blanchard was one of my personal favorite wrestlers.
Right.
When you asked me earlier, I easily could have mentioned him
Yeah.
as one. And to have had the opportunity to get into the ring with him at all, like he was already like very towards the very twilight of his career
Right.
when we wrestled that night. And I remember in the back, he took one look at me and he said, "I just want you to know I have daughters at home, man. I need you to take it easy on me tonight." And I was like, "Of course I will, of course I will." And Tom Pritchard probably doesn't even know who I am, but anytime I ever encountered him, he didn't have the time of day for me. He wasn't
Wow.
he wasn't very nice to me, and him and Terry Taylor. And I don't know, it was years and years ago, but it does stick out in my mind as
Right.
two people that didn't particularly seem to be fond of me for some reason. So maybe I rubbed them the wrong way or whatever.
Yeah, but you had other guys that were fond of you, so who cares?
Yes.
I know you also wrestled this tag team a lot, what they called the extremists. No, the extremists.
This-
Devin,
oh
Storm, and Ace Darling.
yes, Devin Storm.
I'm a
and Ace
fan of
Darling.
both those guys.
Yes, an excellent team.
Yeah.
I was a better wrestler for wrestling them too.
Right.
Usually when we would wrestle, I would just let them call the whole thing and just go along with what they wanted to do because they were working a lot more than I was. And
Right.
they were, those guys down in that New Jersey area were all, and I might get some heat for saying this, but they were all slightly more advanced than the Northeast guys.
Okay.
I think they were wrestling more. They were wrestling more quality opponents, and maybe I'm saying that wrong too. They just seemed to be a little bit more polished
Right.
than we were. So yes, I did. I had lots of matches against Devin Storm, and he was a great wrestler. Is a great
Nice.
wrestler.
Now, did you end up ever wrestling on a Dennis Carluzzo show?
I did. I wrestled. I wrestled with Dennis several times.
Yeah.
All,
Great promoter, huh?
all thanks to Tony. The most notable one, and I'm not sure if this was his show. I think it was the first ever Eddie Gilbert Memorial show.
I was going to bring that up next.
I beat you to the punch.
Yeah.
And that was a show that I had no business being on. I would have never gotten booked on that. That show had about 100 wrestlers just hanging around,
Right.
known wrestlers
Yeah.
that were trying to get booked that night. And
Wow.
and I will quickly tell you that they put me in a tag team match that night. The three other guys that I was wrestling, I'm not going to mention any names. The referee, they were all from the New Jersey area. They all went on to become stars in the WWE, every one of them. And they didn't have the time of day for me. They kept calling me brother. They wouldn't even call me by my real name. And they had this whole match worked out. And Tony Rumble was booking the show.
Right.
He came over and Tony said, what do you got going on in this match? And he said, well, we're going to do this. Then we'll tag in brother. That's me.
Yeah.
And we're going to pin him, and that'll be the end. And Tony said, I like everything you're going to do except for the finish. This is the new finish. He said, when you're going to tag Knuckles in, and I'm going to slip him a pair of brass knuckles. He's going to knock out both of his opponents. He's going to knock out his partner. He's going to knock out the referee. I'm going to get in the ring, and you're all going to sell like you're dead. And the four of them, the referee included, just stood there with their mouths open.
Nice.
And Tony looked at me and said, is that okay with you? And I said, yeah.
Nice.
That sounds good to me. It never happened.
Right.
I ended up in a singles match against
Okay.
a kid named the Inferno Kid, who was
Danny Jamondo or whatever. I know.
and we had a really good match too that night. But that story about the tag match that almost happened.
Yeah, nice. All right, so I want to. You wrestled against the Dudley Boys. You had mentioned it earlier.
Did.
What was that like?
I mentioned I talk about this in the book that I wrote because that night my problems with addiction were on full display. I shouldn't have been in the ring. The Dudleys were making their debut. I was teaming with Tim McNeely, and they gave us a very competitive match. It was not a squash match. And when we first I locked up with Devon. It's their first match in the WWE, and a simple spot that was going to be offense for me, I screwed it up. And it was something that really it bothers me to this day because I didn't have a history of doing that, and I picked a heck of a time to draw a blank in my head. And if I hadn't have been like high in the ring, I probably wouldn't have. Things would have went a lot better.
Right.
And the Dudleys were super cool to me. They let me off the hook immediately. They were always nice to me afterwards. But they went on to become WWE Hall of Famers, so I'm sure they got over it a lot faster than I did.
Yeah, and I mean one of the greatest tag teams of all time. There's no doubt about it.
Agreed.
All right, and you brought up Tim McNeely. How about Mike Hollow?
Wow, Mike Hollow. I wrestled Mike Hollow on one of Tony Rumble's shows, and that's another guy that I was a better wrestler for being in the ring with. He was primarily the trainer at Killer Kowalski's when I was going up there.
Yep.
And he was going to the very, very, very early stages of the Performance Center, and he was coming back up to Malden and passing this on to us.
Nice.
You know, and he and still is, I'm assuming, such a great trainer.
Yeah.
He's such a great trainer. He takes a real personal interest with the people that he's training, and he doesn't put you down when he's training you. He's there to help.
Right.
And I think he's instrumental in a lot of people's careers, and I have nothing but respect for Mike Hollow.
Nice. You said you wrestled on the Eddie Gilbert first memorial show.
I did.
Did you ever get to meet Eddie before that? Like,
like
because he's one of my favorites.
Like Jimmy Valiant, before I met Boogie recently, our paths had never crossed. And with all the wrestling I was doing back then, during the time when I had my run, I never met Eddie Gilbert.
Wow.
But I did meet Missy Hyatt.
Did you?
Yes.
Nice. How about I'm going to bring up a couple guys that I probably never brought up on this show, and thankfully you're here, so I can. Curtis Slam Dog.
Okay, Curtis Slam Dog would be another person, and his brother, the Mercenary,
guys
that I would put into that category with Fred the Rocket Curry, Dylan Cage. He was my champion for wrestling Star Wars, along with Brian Day and along with Astro Man. But Curtis Slam Dog, Roger, great guy, love him.
Nice. Now when you went to Japan, you teamed up with a couple of these guys, if I'm not mistaken. Did you go to Japan with Bill Irwin and Barry Dasso?
I did.
Okay, how were those guys?
Well, those guys were amazing. Like when I first heard that Barry Dasso was coming on the tour, I didn't know what to think because all I knew was his television personas.
Right.
And he turned out to be the nicest, kindest, sweetest man.
Nice.
And while Bill Irwin, we still talk on the phone occasionally. Those guys are legends to me.
Yeah.
And Barry Dasso and Wild Bill, when we were over there, Barry was wrestling as a Super Destroyer.
Right.
And I said, well, I'd really love to do that. And Wally Yamaguchi was booking the shows. And the next thing I know, they started putting me on shows as the Super D. And
Nice.
and he became the Blacktop Bully during those shows.
Okay.
When they put me under the mask. So I got to team with Wild Bill Irwin as a Super Destroyer. And being a big world-class championship wrestling
Right.
mark, I was very, that's like one of the highlights for me to get to have done that on a show in Japan.
Right. Now, at this past Fan Fest, when you were hanging out with Jimmy Vance, did you get a chance to go over and talk to Barry? 'Cause
I did.
They were there, which I
did.
thought was fantastic.
It was the first time I had seen him since we went. The last time I toured Japan, Wally Yamaguchi had given us a booking sheet for a bunch of future dates, and I was like, "Wow, this is going to become lucrative. This is going to be something that's happening." And unfortunately, it didn't quite turn out that way. The promoter of the shows left all of us, the American wrestlers, in a hotel. None of us got paid, and we were in Japan with no idea how we were going to get back to the airport. And I cover all that in my book as well. It's a great story.
Yeah.
And Wild Bill and Barry Dasso helped us all figure out what we needed to do to get back to the airport in Osaka. And that was just an epic adventure.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a great story. How about one more guy, Luis Ortiz?
Luis Ortiz, Demon Ortiz,
Yes.
Another guy that, in my opinion, is in the top 5 professional wrestlers to ever come out of New England. I saw him at Woody's Memorial. I saw him at the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Luis got up and was able to speak a little bit about Woody's more recent time in wrestling, because I really wasn't involved in that. And then I was able to get up and talk about his early days in the wrestling world. So, love Luis. Great guy.
All right. Before I wanted you to plug your book one more time, but real quick, is there anybody right now wrestling that you're like, wow, blown away by, and you think he's going to make it somewhere?
On the independent scene, I would say Nick Curry.
Yeah.
Nick Curry is the prodigy, and I think he's the real deal. And he's like I think he's a 17th generation wrestler.
That's crazy.
And, yeah. So he would be the one that would come off the top of my head.
Nice. All right. Why don't you plug your book one more time?
Well, the book is called From the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat. It's my memoirs and my experiences in life, dating all the way back to when I first got into wrestling, all the way up until today, and my recent trip to Australia, and my relationship with Handsome Jimmy, the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. And I hope everybody will buy it when it comes out in 2020. It'll be on Amazon and iTunes, and hopefully in bookstores as well.
Nice. Knuckles, thanks for coming on.
My
honestly.
pleasure, Leo.
My
My
pleasure
pleasure.
meeting you. And we can do this again. You said you have Mondays off, right? That's my usual show.
I do.
Guys, we're out. Thanks again. Peace.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.